I get it. You're just here to see what the cover is, and don't worry, I'm about to show you. But first there's one piece of context you need to know. This game was a PlayStation 1 exclusive. It didn't appear on any other system. Alright, ready? 3, 2, 1, behold! Look at that quote right on the front. Move over Mario, Nintendo official magazine. That's insane. That would be like if Splatoon had a quote on the front of an official Xbox magazine saying move over Halo. Like, how did this happen? Is it a fake quote? No, it's 100% real. But then why did they say this about a PlayStation exclusive game? Well, that's what this video is about. 40 Winks was developed by Eurocom, and development had started long before a publisher had been secured, with 6 months of pre-production before GT Interactive picked up the rights to publish the title, announcing that the game would be releasing on the PlayStation 1 and Nintendo 64. And it would seem to me, from the information I have, that this game was being made for the Nintendo 64 first and foremost. The first mention of 40 Winks online is from IGN64.com, and not to mention how, due to the massive size difference of Nintendo 64 carts compared to PS1 discs, it's likely this game was made with the Nintendo 64 in mind and then ported to PS1, as PS1 ports to N64 were pretty rare because of those aforementioned size differences. The N64 version of 40 Winks would have shipped on a 32MB N64 cart, but PS1 discs could hold up to 660MB of data. This was the big reason why N64 didn't get many PS1 ports, and the ones it did get are often applauded for being massive technical feats, such as the case with Resident Evil 2 on N64. Of the 660MB available, 40 Winks on PS1 uses 450MB, and if you remove the CD quality audio and PS1 exclusive FMVs from the disc, you are left with only 55MB of actual game data. I see 40 Winks described as a PS1 game that had its N64 port cancelled, but I think it's more accurate to say it was an N64 game that only saw its PS1 port release. 40 Winks was hyped up a lot in N64 magazines at the time, probably because the N64 didn't see nearly as many game releases as the PS1, again due to those cartridges. Did I mention alongside having terrible data storage, N64 carts also cost a lot more money to produce? At the time, PlayStation 1 discs cost around $1 per disc to manufacture. On the other hand, N64 carts cost just over $30 per cart to produce. Want to make 10,000 PS1 discs? That's just $10,000. Want to make 10,000 N64 cartridges? That's $300,000, and it doesn't include all the other expenses related to shipping a game, such as the case and manual, transport, storage, etc. So, okay, cartridges hold much less data than CDs and cost a lot more money to produce, so why did Nintendo still opt for cartridges at a time when every other system had switched to CDs? Well, if you ask Nintendo, I'm sure they'll tell you it's because of the faster loading times. "We value our customers' time," they'd say. "We are always putting our customers first." But really, it's because CDs are easier to pirate. Burn a CDR, then figure out how to make the console read your disc and you're done. Good luck putting your own data on a cartridge though. Even when Nintendo conceded that cartridges were done and switched to CDs with their next console, the GameCube, they still used proprietary mini DVDs that held less data than regular DVDs, simply because, again, harder to pirate games. It wasn't until the Wii that Nintendo started using regular-ass DVDs, and oh, would you look at that? Anyway, because of the N64's severe lack of new game releases compared to the PS1, any new game would get picked up by N64 magazines and would get talked about to death. This is reflected in the fact that N64 mags at the time really put 40 Winks front and center like it was a massive deal, and then PS1 mags would have their article on 40 Winks and small text buried somewhere on the front cover. There was this one advertisement though, that only shows the PlayStation logo at the bottom. Also notice that quote again. Want to see exactly where it came from? Here it is. It's hard to miss. It's right on the front cover. Move over Mario, it's 40 Winks. Looking at it in this context, I don't quite see it as a glowing endorsement of the game as much as it just being a catchy way to introduce the game on the front cover. They use the phrase move over Mario basically just to quickly get across the point that this game is going to be in the same vein as a Mario game. At least that's how I see it when presented in this context, and I think it's kind of dastardly to take the quote out of this context and put it on the front of the PS1 cover. So alright, what happened? Well, both the PS1 and N64 versions of 40 Winks were originally going to release at the same time, but then at some point GT Interactive announced that the N64 version was going to be delayed and released at a later time. The N64 version of the game was 100% completed, with many N64 magazines releasing their reviews of the game. Here's a statement from IGN at the time. GT Interactive told IGN64 today that it is currently debating whether or not to release the Eurocom developed platform of 40 Winks for Nintendo 64. The game, which stars two child heroes on a journey through their dreams, has already released for Sony's PlayStation, but no firm debut date has been set for the 64-bit incarnation of the game. Considering the fact that the PlayStation release of the game has been met with unimpressive results, the title has failed to rank in the top 30, and a Nintendo 64 version seems more and more unlikely. It should be noted that the 64-bit 40 Winks is complete and waiting to ship, IGN64 has been playing a nearly final version of the game for months now and is overall impressed. He is hoping GT Interactive decides to go ahead with production of the game early next year. They did not. So the PS1 release of the game didn't go so well, it seems. It didn't sell many copies and reviewers were pretty lukewarm on the game. Well, I've seen how bad those reviewers can be at playing games sometimes, so I'm gonna go play the game myself to truly see if it's any good. Well, first of all, this game looks great. Fantastic art direction. The moonlight shining through windows, the rain and lightning inside a hedge maze at night perfectly sets the mood the game is going for. Okay, so they were right. This game is not very good. This game kept getting compared to Super Mario 64 and I have no idea why. Because this game is the most linear 3D platformer I have ever played. Even more linear than Crash Bandicoot. So the entire point of the game is to collect the 40 winks. Get it? Each level has a certain amount of them and you need to get all of them. Some people would compare the winks to power stars in Mario 64, but really I see them more like the crystals in Crash Bandicoot. They are there to be easily collected throughout the course of the level. They aren't hidden or a reward for completing a certain challenge or puzzle. You will just collect them through normal play, and you likely won't be able to miss one, again just like the crystals in Crash. Then there's the cogs. The cogs. The cogs are the worst collectible in 3D platformer history. They are basically like coins in Mario 64 or Wumpa Fruit in Crash. But wait, they don't give you an extra life, and the game already has the rings from Sonic the Hedgehog with the exact same health mechanics, and RT tokens that when you collect 10 of them will give you an extra life. So what is the point of the cogs then? Well, their purpose is to ruin the entire game. Every 5 feet there will be a door in front of you with a cog requirement, and you need to have the number of cogs it says to continue the level. The problem is that cogs are plentiful and you need to collect every single one you see, literally every single one, because every cog door will have the maximum amount of cogs you could possibly have at that point as the requirement at once. So not only are all the levels basically corridors connected to each other with one intended path to the level, but the game forces you to know the level back to front to collect everything. This doesn't just apply to the cogs, this also applies to the aforementioned winks and also dream keys. Dream keys are what are used to unlock the boss battle at the end of that world, and once again, miss a single one and you need to go back and find it, and sometimes they aren't in the most obvious place. Imagine if in Crash Bandicoot, every few feet there was a door with a Wumpa Fruit requirement, and if you hadn't collected every single Wumpa Fruit up to that point, then you couldn't progress. That's 40 winks. Then you add in subpar controls with a weird emphasis on slow and clunky button mashy combat, and you have yourself a bad experience. There's also these jack-in-the-box things that turn you into different characters for a short period of time. Kinda cool, I guess. My other big gripe with the game is that it has a fantastic premise that it does nothing with. The entire premise of the game is that the main characters are dreaming, and that opens up the cog door to all sorts of possibilities. It's a dream, so the devs could make any crazy level they wanted, and it would make sense thematically. But no, it's just spooky house, spooky garden, spooky forest, spooky graveyard. And then I got to the second world and it's all water levels, with the first one being an industrial water level. Oh look, I missed 2 cogs somewhere, now I need to go back through the literal underwater maze to see if I can find them. Yeah, I'm done, I'm not playing anymore. I give 40 winks a 3 out of 10. But there's still one question left to answer. Why did 40 winks not come to the Nintendo 64? That was the main console it was targeting, and the N64 version was 100% complete. There was no more work that needed to be done, so why not just release it? All we can do is speculate, but I think I've already painted the picture for you. It's those cartridges again. There's still one more downside to the Nintendo 64's cartridges that I've yet to mention, and that's manufacturing time. So N64 cartridges not only cost more to make and held way less data, but also took way longer to produce. Companies would have to order cartridges well in advance to have all the copies ready by release day, and if they needed to order more copies in reaction to higher demand than anticipated, it would take many weeks for those new copies to hit shelves, enough time for people to lose interest or move on. This created a huge headache for publishers releasing a game on the N64. If they ordered too few copies, then they could miss out on a ton of potential sales and the time it would take for new copies to hit the shelves, but if they ordered too many copies, then they would lose a huge amount of money due to those high manufacturing costs. I believe this was the reason GT Interactive decided to send the PS1 port out into the world as sort of a canary in a coal mine. Because there was a lot less risk associated with it, they could use the PS1 version to figure out the game's demand and gauge player reception, giving them a good idea of how many N64 carts to order, and also if they should even bother in the first place. But as we know, the PS1 version sold poorly and reviewed poorly, and it seemed GT Interactive just wanted to walk away from the game at that point. But honestly, I think that was a mistake. N64 owners were primed for this game. They were the audience that got all those 40 Winks magazine ads and front covers, and they also didn't have a lot of choices of games to buy compared to PlayStation owners. I think if they had released 40 Winks on the N64, it would have sold way more copies than the PlayStation version did, at least in my opinion. N64 owners still wouldn't have found it very fun though. And so that's the story of the most shocking PS1 game cover. In the end, I think the story of this PlayStation game kind of acts as a microcosm of why the N64 failed, why it didn't have nearly as many games, and why third parties rarely supported the system. 40 Winks didn't release on the N64, despite the developers' every intention to do so, and Nintendo only had themselves to blame.